Good morning. You are watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Isaac Kwagala, your host. On today's edition of Focus on Parliament, we explore the question of the re-emergence of the military general court-martial as a tool for political persecution and repression, as highlighted by the continued trial of civilians in that court. Also on the program, we make a forecast of what might happen in the new year to come, 2025, by contextualizing the mandate and the performance of Parliament, even as the country prepares for the forthcoming general elections. Our esteemed viewers, you are most welcome to this program. I now have the pleasure and the honor to introduce to you my esteemed guests who are with me here in studio to help us make a sense of today's topic. Let me start from my extreme left is Dr. Tolit Charles Ayat Atia. Yes, Dr. Atia is a researcher, a political economist, and the Associate Director of the Center for Constitutional Governance. You are most welcome to the program. Doctor, say hello to the viewers.
It's a pleasure, and particularly around this time of the year where the festivities are high on the agenda, I think it will be a great discussion filled with good and high spirit.
Many thanks indeed, Doctor, for joining us. Next to Doctor is a mainstay on the program, the distinguished academic Professor Mwambusa Ndebesa, who is also a renowned political commentator. Prof, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Good morning to the viewers and listeners out there. Good morning, panelists. And I'm glad to be in this space to deliberate on issues of nation and state building.
Thank you, Prof, for joining us. And of course, next to me is the gentleman, Mr. Timothy Chemonges, who is also a regular on the platform. Mr. Chemonges is the Associate Director of the Center for Policy Analysis and the Parliament Watch. Dogu, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Good to be here, and glad to have been part of this journey since the start of the year. And as the year really comes to an end, we are grateful to our viewers, CCG and all the other panelists really, for the continued contribution to the discourse of the country. This is going to be part of those. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Dr. Tolit, I'm going to ask you to get us started. This subject of the continued trial of the civilians in the military general court-martial has provoked significant interest from so many quarters. Last week, we saw the president wade strongly into the debate by making rather interesting comments, strong and interesting comments. He justified the trial of civilians before the military court-martial as necessary for the stability of the country. But we are also aware that under our constitutional framework, the military court-martial is not contemplated as a court of judicature. If anything, we now have two decisions of the Constitutional Court to the effect that civilians should only be tried in the conventional civil courts, not the military general court-martial. Of course, there is the whole question of the politics since the Attorney General went to the Supreme Court, appealed that decision and stayed the implementation of the same. We are awaiting the final decision of the Supreme Court. But help us understand, what is this animal that is the general court-martial, and why is it at this time now re-emerging as a key component into our body politic?
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. And once again, good morning to the viewers. And we are glad that you're being out there and watching us, and us here in the studios trying to make sense of many of these things, then forms a platform where we can actually interface. Now, Isaac, you're right, in your own right as a lawyer, you know that in this whole discourse of law, there are a number of principles that underpin interpretation, that underpin application of jurisprudence, which is largely the history and philosophy of law. They are principles that underpin regulations, and all this for varied purposes. When you come down to this issue of the court-martial, I think without getting caught up into very complicated legal interpretations, our Constitution is very clear. The judiciary is actually part of the organs that make government. And a very simple way to describe this is that you have these two parties. You have an elected government, so to speak. Then you have those who elect the government. Between these two parties, just like in any simple contract, they agree on a number of things. They agree to cooperate on a number of things. Key or incumbent on the elected government is that it promises to live, work, and fulfill its promises within the law. And that is then you assume an ecosystem of dispensation of rule of law. And all this pact is captured in what we call a constitution, which is the document grant, the grand document or grand norma. And all other sets of laws thereof become subordinate to that piece of document. And that is about the history and the evolution of constitution and constitutionalism. But just like in any contract or pact between two people, two living people, organs, living person, living organization, living person, living institution, you anticipate conflict. So, beyond rule of law and the cooperation, there is also the strong element of peace and security. That you are saying, whereas we're entering this cooperation, we anticipate where there are challenges in our dealings. There should be a way to resolve. And because each of you has interest and position in this social pact, that is government and the people, the philosophers anticipated a third person who is an independent person, who is an arbiter, and this is the judiciary. You know? So, in a very simple way, this is what this animal, the justice is, the judiciary is, and how it comes to play within a bigger dispensation of democracy and rule of law. Now, there are very cardinal issues that are considered of this arbiter. You know, one and most key is that this arbiter needs to be an independent person. So you'll find that within our law books or rule books, there is an attempt to try and give the judiciary as much independence as possible. So that then, when it comes to times of arbitration, it is not seen as if they are taking sides. That is a cardinal principle, or what would you call it? That is where the sanctity, that's the source of sanctity in the rule of law. Now, where is the problem with the court-martial? If the court-martial is a court as created and defined by, say, the UPDF Act, and seen as a specialized court, tribunal, disciplinary unit, whatever nomenclature it will take. The first instance of departure is that as a creature of the Act, and this Act being part, the UPDF Act being part of the laws of Uganda, make it subordinate to the Constitution of Uganda, and therefore the institutions therefore named, enshrined, and defined. Courts have hierarchies. The highest hierarchy of this court is the Supreme Court. Come to the Constitutional Court, which is specialized court, especially on matters of interpretation of the Constitution. Then you come to the ordinary courts, the High Court, the Magistrates Court, and then the lower courts therein. And there are also a number of specialized tribunals. So where is the problem? The problem here is that, given that tripartite relationship I've tried to define in the animal constitutionalism, rule of law, and democracy, the state, which has the military as part of it, okay, is an interested party. And this court is within its precincts. And it's not a natural court. Why? For instance, the chairman of this court is a nominee by the executive. Okay? Its sitting in hierarchy as defined by the Constitution clearly makes it a subordinate court. The officers of that court are primarily soldiers who are subject to military rule. Therefore, by nature and character, and given its specialization, this court is largely meant to administer issues arising from military discipline, and then in certain instances, probably entertaining some matters that may arise from neighboring laws. For instance, we know that soldiers are they're also part of citizens. So sometimes soldiers may engage in affrontation of the law and not necessarily in matters that are typically military. Soldiers may get at fault with civilians and all these kind of things. So the issue of code of conduct and all that are well caught up in this law. Why then does it look unnatural that you're having a civilian being brought to this court? Again, without going into the details of the number of cases that have come up, but I think there are three worthy of mention, or particularly one. The Nakubule case, which was presided over by the Supreme Court, and over the question whether civilians can be tried in the court-martial or not. And the Supreme Court was clear about this. I mean, the High Court was clear about that particular petition. I don't remember the number, I think it's 163 or something, but I will check. So for me, the cardinal argument here is that both by creature and nature, this court does not have credentials to try civilians. You can clearly see a situation where an elective state is arguably, increasingly, technically trying to become authoritarian. Because the particular matter in court at the moment involves Dr. Kizza Besigye, who, yes, was in the military before, got officially discharged, and has been a politician, professional politician, for almost 20 years plus. We also know that with nuances of security threats like terrorism, we've had civilians and young people being dragged to this court. And under circumstances where it generates a lot of debate and puts to question, you know, the big notion of whether, as it were, if we say we are a constitutional state, we are a democratic state, why then can we adhere to these basic interpretations? Because even if Besigye and his colleague were brought to a civilian court, we are not short of laws to be able to try that nature of matter. Then the other issue is the question of cherry picking. For instance, we all know Jamil Mukulu and his association with the ADF. Why, for instance, wasn't Jamil Mukulu tried in the General Court Martial? We know that this particular ruling that the Attorney General has appealed did not only find the continued prosecution of civilians in the court martial illegal and outlawed, but it also gave arguments and issued orders. Amongst many, one of them was that, as per that ruling, progressively, all civilians who found themselves still facing charges in the court martial, those cases and files were supposed to systematically be transferred back to the civilian courts. So you find that it's not just the Besigye issue. You find that there is also a serious issue of the NRM government and the current state in adhering to court orders. And if the state or government chooses to begin to act in contempt of court as the big boy in the crowd, what then? What precedence is it setting for its institutions, for its officers, for other citizens?
That's a profound question to reflect on. Thank you, Doctor, for your perspective. Professor, do you find the comments of the president disturbing? Because in some quarters of the population, they worry that the president has low-key declared martial law in the country, because if the idea is, I'm a citizen, he says if you bring yourself under the purview of the military, whereas not, then you are subject automatically to martial law and the general court martial. So that would mean, for example, tomorrow if I perhaps had the cap on my head that ordinarily the military would claim it is theirs, like we've seen members of the political opposition, boys from the National Unity Platform being paraded into the military court martial. Is this the president saying that now I am going to leverage this as a weapon to fight political opponents? Do those comments worry you at all?
Thank you. What is worrying me is not just those mere comments in the tweet he issued. What is worrying me is a wider context. A wider context of militarizing Uganda. Militarization of all sectors and militarizing of society. As you know, militarization, I think, started with police. Police has been militarized. Then agriculture militarized. I think conservation militarized because we have wildlife under military. The fisheries is militarized. Construction is militarized. I think even markets, I have had soldiers there participating in organizing markets. They are also militarized. And now there are very many aspects that have been militarized under the NRM. So now let me come back to militarizing of the justice system. So this is the militarization of the justice system, which has not begun, not even limited to the court martial, because here we are talking about the Black Mamba. That was kind of militarizing the courts. The courts. Then we have got a history of these places called the safe houses, which were safe houses of the military. And one could talk about more in which the military has gone beyond its traditional role of defending this country from external forces and maybe preserving the integrity of Uganda. So there is also militarization of culture. We have a lot of cultural militarization, especially political militarization. And then, as he linked it to politics, I think we are, besides militarizing the justice system, we have also been, under NRM, been militarizing political participation and political competition. So, as he pointed out, there are cases like Jamili Mukuru, Koyole or whatever. Koyolo was involved in dissidents. You have even the case of the Rwenzori King and those people who are involved in skirmishes with the military, using the military hardware. They were tried in civilian courts. So it's, in civilian courts. So there is a trend where those who are tried, civilians who are tried in the military court martial, are actually political opponents. Kabazuguruka was a political opponent, FDC. Besigye, political opponent. These boys of NUP, political opponents. So now this is weaponizing the court martial to score political goals. So you see that the kind of people tried in military courts, the civilians, are not necessarily those who were holding those weapons, whatever interpretation they are giving it, that they are ordinarily a preserve of the military. I don't know whether pistol even is a preserve of the military, because I've seen pistols held by even members of parliament within the parliamentary circles. So I think this is weaponizing the court martial to score political ends. So it is militarizing political competition. Because otherwise, I don't see whether that case of Besigye or Kabazuguruka would not be tried in a civilian court, because the civilian courts are not only limited to civil cases, but if you go by that, then all these robbers will have to go to the court martial because they are using AK-47s. If we follow that logic, then all robbers using guns will go to the court martial. The court martial will be overwhelmed. So this is a case of militarization of the justice system. And it has been a trend, and we have kind of not brought it to the public space for discussion. I'm glad some of these things are coming up, but I think the arguments have been technicized, but I think we needed to broaden the discussion to militarization of Uganda. And when you militarize society, militarize the values, and celebrate, there is a celebration of militarism, which, if I go to history, was common at the beginning of the 20th century in Germany. German celebrated militarism. And although that military actually contributed to development of Germany in terms of economic development, it did, but the way Germany was developing, it had a very big technological base and research base from the military. And it was, valor? It was admired. It was celebrated. And they had that patriotism of Germany. You and me and everybody knows what happened in the First and Second World War because of militarization of society. So we have to be very careful, or we have to discuss this issue, bring it to the fore, and deliberate on it and see where we are heading with this whole notion of militarizing society, of valorizing the military culture, and now nearly everything is militarized. Now we have gone to construction. Now railway lines, even companies. There is now a security company which is owned by the military. So the militarizing development in agriculture, militarizing justice system, militarizing all aspects of life, and now militarizing political competition is very dangerous. It's not only looked at, we might even narrowly look at in terms of NRM having a vantage point and a privileged point that it is in power and is using the state to weaponize the military. We are forgetting that we are militarizing norms. We are militarizing politics. Even those who are not in power are now kind of militarized. You see, when you see those boys of Chagulanyi putting on those capes, that is an indicator of militarization. So in a society where you militarize politics, you militarize dissent, you militarize competition, then where we are heading may it not be civil politics. It is going to be military politics. We are gradually eroding civil politics, respect of the rule of law, respect of opponents, and using the military to score political goals. That is the import of this court martial. But I see citizens have looked at from a narrow perspective at the technical level. But that is not what President Museveni has in mind. President Museveni has in mind the bigger picture of militarizing the justice system. And that is the one contained in his missive. He is saying, but it is helping us solve the problem. But there is law. I mean, if you go by that logic and say, when we use the court martial, things are done and we solve a problem. If you are poor, if you are poor, do you go to somebody's garden and you start stealing? Because if you are poor and hungry, you say, I've solved the problem. It is very easy to solve a problem by grabbing something. You will have gone out of law. So, are we solving the problem according to law? Because you may solve the problem of the Karamajong rustlers, but you create another problem of weakening the rule of law. And when you weaken the rule of law, you weaken democracy. What impact will it have to democracy? And when you also weaken the rule of law and you weaken institutions to hold each other accountable, and you have no separation of powers, you are weakening institutions, the rule of institutions. And by extension, you are weakening the state. And by extension, you are weakening nation building. Because we are reaching a stage where we are looking at politics as a zero-sum game, and whoever has the military force takes the day. Now, let's use even the example of yesterday. That there were some young people who were gathering at Busawara, and then the military went there and dispersed them. Even if they were suspected that they could be involved in some mischief, I would expect the military to go there and observe them, but leave them do what they are doing under your observance in case. But to go there and disperse them just because you have the military. So you are, for us experts, you would say in a nation building, you are not having group cooperation. You are increasingly creating a distance between the various groups in Uganda. In this case, you are creating a very big political distance between different political parties and political class. And we are an emerging nation. We are a post-colonial state. We are not yet a fully functioning nation state. So we should be doing everything possible to respect each other, to reduce the distance between the political groups and between the ethnic groups and religious groups. By and large, all the groups in the country, we should be reducing the distance. But when you use the military and you militarize political space, and as I pointed out, in all aspects, economy, justice, political competition, every aspect is being militarized. The end result will be increasing the distance, the social distance, the political distance between the citizens and the state, and between the political players and the political players. And then you have a seriously divided country, which does not augur well for nation building and state building. Me, I emphasize those two. Without a nation here would be a national identity of where you have got group integration. You know, NRM came up talking about having an integrated economy. Here I'm talking about integrated groups. And you cannot have integrated groups if you are using force. If you are using military force, we need to use intellectual force, a force of persuading, not the force of coercion, outrightly, openly, like this. So, my conclusion here is that my president, Comrade Museveni, should rethink the whole notion or the whole ideology of militarizing all aspects of society in Uganda. I heard Professor on civic space, Professor Ogenga Latigo challenging political parties in Uganda that they don't have ideology, the DP or FDC or NOP, that even NRM has no ideology. I want to inform him that actually NRM has an ideology, i.e. militarism. Militarism is an ideology. You know, people think NRM doesn't have an ideology. The ideology is militarism. And they have exercised it, they have practiced it, and they continue to practice it. So, the whole of this debate, in my opinion, I would tilt it towards looking at militarizing the justice system.
Thank you for your perspective, Professor Timothy. I want us now to examine the role of the judiciary in this entire debate, because in his missive, the president alluded to the fact that if a person is dissatisfied with the decision of the General Court Martial, they can appeal to the conventional civilian courts. In the same way, actually, I think preceding the president's missive, the Supreme Court gave a ruling, a judgment, to the effect that a person who is dissatisfied with the decision of the General Court Martial cannot appeal before a civilian court. So you see the contradiction. And it leaves me wondering if the president has been well advised on those technical legal notions, because the president came off as if he was simply profiling his personal opinion of what the law is. So,
and additionally, actually, the president, if I read his missive clearly, he was saying that, what is your problem? After all, if you are dissatisfied in the military court martial, you have the option of going to the civilian courts. And then the Supreme Court says,
no,
hands off.
So there seems to be a contradiction, and the judiciary is not helping matters, because we have a pending appeal before the Supreme Court to settle this matter for once and for all. What is the way forward for the Ugandan citizen?
I think that looking at our rule of law really and the governance space, countries, as PLO Lumumba has put it very clearly, countries can survive poor executives, or executives that do not exercise their mandate according to the constitution, the same with legislatures and parliaments in the world. But if you have a judiciary that is weak and is not strong and can easily be compromised, you have a country fumbling and reflecting the picture that the previous submissions have been made. And so I think that there is a fundamental problem when it comes to the breakdown of institutions. I wouldn't mind the president making his comments really in terms of what he feels, how he would wish certain things to be handled in the country. But to the extent that these institutions are weak and they are likely to be influenced by the position that the president is making and making them publicly, that poses a big threat in terms of the current structure of how our institutions are placed. And the position, of course, that the president has, some of them are not very accurate, as it suggests that while the civilian courts have a bit of backlog, it seems to suggest that the military courts don't have. Actually, on the contrary, there is a huge backlog.
And that they are more efficient.
Yeah, and in terms of efficiency, I think that's also very subjective, looking at the many cases that are still pending, including the most recent ones by the individuals that were arrested during the previous elections. It took 4 years. There are others who are still being, the courts are still handling their matter. It can only tell you to the extent to which some of these courts are efficient. The other angle really is to look at it from the perspective of whose interests these court martials really serve. I think it serves more the executive. The appointing authority to some of those to the court martial is by the high command, for which the president sits in the same docket. So you'll find that as I highlighted, the probability of civilians being able to get justice in these structures is very unlikely. And therefore, I think that the question of militarization and all, looking at all these things, I think we are in a space where the executive, and specifically I think President Museveni, has indeed decided to bulldoze his way in all these things. And unfortunately, I think that the problem in our context, I look at it from the place where the president, especially President Museveni, his views, his aspirations drive the country. I don't know if he wakes up and really regrets that he's still in power. I would suppose that for the many years that the president has been in power, where we are at today, it can only get worse, because then you utilize the ideology, as Professor used, to maintain or to keep yourself in power, which is the use of military and the force therein. And so really, I think the points that have been made specifically cannot be overemphasized in terms of the ability of citizens to get justice in these courts, and more importantly, ensuring that the rule of law can be respected. Unfortunately, the remarks by the president by default must have been construed by the leadership of the courts to send a very clear message on what the president's mind is at, because it's very unlikely that the court,
to the public, is it to condition us?
No, it's to the judiciary really.
Oh.
I think the public really, it's the public are not a fundamental category of people to even take into consideration when it comes to these directives. I think the message is to the judiciary, and specifically to the Supreme Court, that as you even go ahead to reconsider or give a position in light of what the Constitutional Court made, there are a number of factors that you must consider here, and I think the message is very clear. And so the message really is not to the public. I think the public will continue being victims, and at the end of the day, we've not galvanized a situation where the public can rise up and have their position taken in. You'll see that the best practices across the world, the justice that the executive would want to achieve can equally be achieved in the civilian courts. But it's to the extent, and you see, by the way, the president also highlights the issue of the bail, and he seems to suggest that civilian courts are more susceptible to granting bail. A thing that the president has not been a proponent so much on the issue of bail. In fact, at some point he seemed to suggest that we should go back to review that, and for capital offences not grant bail, as though it was an insinuation at some point. So there is a fundamental problem. I think all this again originating back to the person of the president and to Museveni himself, in light of all this issue. But ultimately, I think that we've got to get to a place where the civilian rules prevail over the military rule, as envisaged within the Constitution. The Constitution envisages a situation where the military rule will be subservient, will be below the civilian rule, but it is the vice versa by practice. And so this can only be achieved, I think, by the current structure, by the current system, the current government getting out of place. I think that looking at the remarks by the president, I think it's because he doesn't know any better. Or if he really knows, or if he really knows better, it doesn't serve his interest. Because what would explain the insistence of the president to have Besigye to be charged before the court martial? I think that his view, the perspective of the president and his colleagues is predominantly mad with the issue of militarism, really. And it seems to be the ideology that drives them, and that every time you have you have a perspective to address, militarism become an option. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim, for your reflections. Prof, before we go into a break in a minute, I want to pose this question to you as a historian and a political theorist. The president in his missive alluded to the element of calling for a referenda as a definitive measure to resolving this question, if it is not in any case resolved by the courts themselves. It is there, that element in his missive. So do you think that would be the correct path? Because under the law, our constitutional framework seems to settle the question after all. What is the president trying to communicate? Because he says if we are to ask, for example, the people in Karamoja and the neighboring districts, they would agree that the general court-martial should try civilians who bring themselves under the purview of the military court. What would be your reading of that message?
First of all, even in terms of his statement, I think it was sub judice. We would say that also ours is sub judice, but for us we are mainly talking about procedural issues, whether this should be tried, not the substance of the case brought against Besigye. Not the substance. That's not what we are discussing, because we don't know exactly the details of the charge. But for him, when it comes to the matter before the Supreme Court, he is commenting on the substantive matter that the Supreme Court is supposed to pronounce itself on after the Attorney General had appealed. So there is a way the Supreme Court is going to be influenced. Now, referendum. There is an English word called paradox. A paradox is sometimes something that achieves the opposite of what it is supposed to achieve. Let me explain it like this. Somebody can tell you that from here, when you want to go to Chambogo, when you want to go to Chambogo, you take the left. When you take the right, you will go the wrong way. The right becomes wrong. You see a paradox there. If you take the right, you will go the wrong way, whereas the right is taken to be the right. So similarly, a referendum, which is supposed to be a vote involving citizens, all citizens actually, it looks like participatory democracy, the epitome of democracy. It can achieve the opposite. It can be abused. All power can be abused, including citizens' power. Even citizens' power can be abused. I will give you history. Authoritarian, totalitarian leaders in the past, like Napoleon, like specifically Napoleon days, there was no much of referendum and voting, although he rode on the popularity of the masses, the opinions. When you look at Mussolini, the fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany, they rode on the back of citizens' popularity. In fact, they were referenda and elections, popular elections in Germany to bring Hitler to power. Popular. He was supported. Actually, he won elections by 90%. So let's be careful, because we can easily abuse citizens' power and whip up sentiments and whip up emotions, not whip up reasoning, not appeal to the cognitive abilities of the citizens, but the affective, emotional, psychological abilities of the citizens, and take the country to a wrong path. So this referendum thing can be abused. Let's be careful how referenda are held and what is the context. You see, we need to look at context. I don't know whether people are understanding me when I talk about the context. Like this court-martial, I tried to give it a wider context. Ideological context, historical context, ideological framework, ideological roots, and justification for something. So, if we take it to a referendum, first of all, who will be in charge of the referendum? who will be organizing the referendum. It is the state, it is government who will be talking to the referendum, who will be having more space for the referendum. So if you just assume that because citizens are participating in something and therefore it is the right thing, you may get it wrong. Today, by the way, if you asked the general masses, including us here, whether we should not pay tax, people would vote for paying no tax, but that wouldn't work for there is no state that does not levy tax. But you put it to referendum in the villages, especially today, no more paying of tax. For them, they thought graduated tax was the only tax. No, even these indirect taxes, assuming they were all removed. So there is no excise tax, there is no customs tax, there is no income tax, there is no tax. You put it to a referendum, people will say, that is what we support, no tax. So this business of the court issues being taken to a referendum, it does not work. That is why courts are normally shielded away from these sentiments, from populism. Courts are shielded, but the good thing of courts, where they become democratic, is that they have got that appeal system. See, magistrate court, then the high court, then the court of appeal, then the constitutional court, then the Supreme Court, and I'm told even within the Supreme Court you can still appeal to the Supreme Court. These lawyers can, you lawyers can correct me. So that brings in systems of checks and balances even within the court system, although the courts do not depend on popular will. So taking the judiciary, the legal matters, into populism. Populism doesn't mean necessarily that it is positive popular. No, it is actually negative popular. It is abusing the power of the citizens. So let's not abuse the power of citizens to take away human rights. That is why constitutions have got even fundamental rights that are not subject to limitations, because they realize
non-derogable rights.
Non-derogable. If you begin subjecting the bail, for example, which is in the fundamental human rights, if you begin subjecting certain rights of a fair hearing to the popular masses, and then using demagogues and using the television and using popular whipping, then we shall get it wrong. That is why there are supposed to be checks and balances between the different arms of government. There are those arms of government which are involved in whipping up popular masses, and there are those which are supposed to check them. And our judiciary, especially the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court, I think are letting the country down. You hear them, you hear the Supreme Court, even in its ruling, saying that, we are following the law as it is. We follow the law as it is. I beg to be corrected. The judiciary is not supposed to only follow the law as passed by Parliament. Yes and no. Yes, because the laws that they enforce, they judge, they interpret, are made by Parliament. But they are also required by the Constitution to interpret the law and sometimes give a judicial review. That's why they say laws also, the judiciary or the courts make laws. They give a judicial review. They review the laws passed by Parliament in view of the Constitution, so that you don't abuse your position as Parliament also to make laws. And when the judiciary also abuses its power, the courts are supposed to bring it to order. So let our Supreme Court and Constitutional Court not hide under, we are interpreting the law according to the law made in Parliament. No, there is supposed to be a judicial review, another eye by the judiciary to see whether even the laws made by Parliament are constitutional. Because in Uganda, I think I will be corrected, we have the supremacy of the constitution, not the supremacy of parliament. So the judiciary should not hide under that separation of powers, that what has been made by parliament is sacrosanct and therefore cannot be interpreted. No, the constitution in Uganda is supreme, and therefore the judiciary should interpret the constitution as it is, not as the laws that are made by parliament, because parliament is not supreme, but the constitution is supreme.
Thank you, Professor, for your insights. Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. Do stay with us. We'll see you back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. Glad you are still watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we make a forecast of what is to come in the year 2025 by emphasizing the mandate and the performance of Parliament in the year ending. Our viewers, we welcome you to this segment. Let me start with you, Timothy. The performance of Parliament for 2024 has not been that encouraging, given the long litany of the scandals it has had to wrestle with. What are your expectations in the year to come, 2025, even as we head into the new electoral cycle?
So I know for a fact that Parliament will now be heading towards the fifth term, and so the fifth term, as we've seen in the past, is usually predominantly characterized by members of Parliament now getting back to the campaign mode, and so absenteeism is likely to be high. The participation in Parliament is likely to go down, partly because of the default nature, to go back and mobilize for votes. And so I think Parliament, again, looking at it from its position and its ability to have things run, we've seen this year a situation where the matters to do with accountability, the demand by accountability by the citizens in terms of ensuring that Parliament can provide clear mechanism of its responding to the needs of the citizens were very unclear. You saw the citizens with the exhibitions and some of the other concerns coming out very strong. There are many questions and answers being given. What that means is that as we go towards the next elections, we are likely to see a situation where Parliament will still continue to operate in a manner that it has done. So there's likely not to be not change. But also, more importantly, what I envisage is a situation where the executive, I think, is going to stretch further its dominance in Parliament, and that as we've seen in the recent past, where you see the executive coming very firm in what it wants to go through Parliament, using all the mechanisms. See, recently we saw how Parliament handled the budget process, the previous budget process, and the response of the executive. We saw the rationalization process, specifically the coffee bill, and how the executive came up very strongly to the extent of beating up some of the members of Parliament who they alleged that were resisting and creating a bit of resistance. So we foresee a situation where the executive will come very firm and very strong just to enjoy, because as we stand now, the checks and balances have greatly been affected, and so what that means is that we see an extension of the executive on the legislature, and on what we've been discussing currently, it's the extension of the executive to the judiciary. In terms of Parliament's ability to continue championing the questions of human rights, it's another area that I think is very important, to the extent that this period, especially as we go towards the elections, the respect of human rights is greatly compromised, and that is characterized and seen in the previous elections. And to that end, Parliament has not come very strong in ensuring that in the previous times, we still have people being, we still have instances where people are missing. There is irregular abductions. There are matters to do with security in the country. That Parliament should come very strong in them, but unfortunately, to the extent that the executive still enjoys the overwhelming influence and support within the legislature, that we've seen, like in the past, where you saw the speaker, I think in Bukedea, kneeling down before the president, saying, "Oh, Mr. President, you are the only one that believes in me. The rest seem not to really believe me." What that a public manifestation of how the legislature and the leadership views the executive. We've also seen, like in this time, when we saw the speaker together with the section of the members of parliament went to, was it Luengo, the constituency of the member of parliament, Namuju Sisi, and the speaker came out very public in terms of the question of corruption, saying
glorifying corruption publicly,
to the extent that the people can get it from the national platform and bring it to you guys. It doesn't really matter. So it only speaks to the factor of accountability, transparency, which still remains very unclear, and the continued enjoyment of the protection that the leadership or corrupt individuals still continue to enjoy under the wings of the executive and some of the colleagues in power. We are also increasingly seeing institutions that should be exercising their mandate being weakened further, and so as we move towards next year, we'll see the autonomy that some of these institutions enjoy, not having the autonomy that they should be. We saw recently the speaker responding to the concerns by the Equal Opportunities Commission on their request for information about the earnings of the MPs and the response they got from the institution of parliament. And so I think that many times, and as we go forward, we'll see that the autonomy that institutions should be enjoying greatly gets compromised. The last is around the budget, the issues of resources. I think that elections are highly commercialized. And what that means is that both the executive, the legislature, and any of these individuals who are looking forward to standing up for elective position will want to utilize all the opportunities available to get resources to enable them to finance the elections. And we've seen in the past some of the accusations and some of the concerns of the executive interfering with the budget process, or taking advantage of the budget process to get resources to finance the elections, the upcoming elections. The same goes to some of the games, or some of the fundamental approach or the strategic approach that some of these institutions have taken to budget corruption, or to budget corrupt resources within the budget, to ensure that they have resources to facilitate. So I think those are some of the things that I envisage, but in the coming year. But more importantly, I think that the issue of the judiciary will continue, the independence of the judiciary will continue lingering, because I think it's a core link for us, that while we have the legislature, we have parliament, we have the executive, and they have a very clear mandate. At least we should be able to have we should have an institution that can protect the people. Yeah.
Doesn't look like a positive outlook, but Dr. Tolit, what are your projections for the year to come, 2025, in the context of the Parliament's mandate and performance as an institution of the state?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and one that is not very easy to predict, especially in the context of a country like ours and the way it operates. However, it is an exciting one because I have tried to get into the habit towards the end of the year to look at my crystal ball and be able to try and look into the year to come and how it will look like. Three things stand out for me. One, we are headed for an election year. I want to use a statement one historian and writer made when he was commenting about the French Revolution and the players. And this particularly brings me to the Bourbons. And in spite of the challenges they went through and the grand opportunity they had, to recapture power and then begin to work towards, changing the lives of their people. In the excitement of the quest for grandeur, the quest for status, and an arrogant attitude made them quickly lose what they had got as a coveted ball. So this writer says, unfortunately, the Bourbons remembered nothing and forgot nothing. So we have had for maybe the last 20 years plus elections that have been characterized by chaos, violence, and a lot of trepidation brought to the country, largely because of the lack of trust in the levers that we use in our elections. And I will exemplify this. For instance, the 2021 elections, the Electoral Commission registered approximate 18 million voters. Those who actually turned out to vote were approximately 10 million or thereabouts. 8 million people disappeared in the cracks. There is no official report that they probably died or migrated. They are still in Uganda. So the kind of picture you have of our elective politics or democracy is that you have almost just 50%, participating. And maybe to just put it in a broader and proper context, that the population of Uganda right now is about approximately 40 million, with 50% or thereabout less than 18 years. So those who are 18 years and therefore under our laws eligible to participate in the elections is about half, which is about 20 million. So that's not very far from what we saw in 2021, 18 million, only 10 about came, and again, so what are you having? You're having half the population, okay, being able to participate in elected politics. But in real sense, when you remove the other half, which are not who are underage, then again you have half of those who actually should be participating
Are eligible.
Yeah, participating. So you see that our leaders are elected by a very narrow population. Now, this does not augur well for the principle or in for the cardinal working principles of democracy, where it's about majoritarianism. So I'm already beginning to think whether, as Uganda, we probably do not need to start rethinking. We need to start reimagining the democracy. I don't know whether this democracy we have is the best. I don't even see, in terms of, if you to target to numbers, whether there is real legitimacy for the people who rule us. Because literally, it's a very narrow group that is participating. So what happens to the other group? Where do their voices go? You know? And I think for me, that's a wake-up call for those working in the civic space, civil society, and all this. We might begin to construe a new citizen agenda to be able to have elaborate participation. So what do I see? I see a very grim picture, like I said, borrowing from the Bourbons. It looks like we learned nothing and we have forgotten nothing in the so many years. Professor put a rider to Professor Ogenga Latigo's remarks that probably we are actually engaged in politics, you know, without a frame of ideologies, if you like. He clarifies that actually the NRM has an ideology, and which is military.
Yeah.
And we are beginning to see it because he's ably demonstrated that. Now, so chaos, a much more narrow, skewed public space is what I see. What else do I see? The issue of failing institutions, and therefore translated into failing delivery of public service, or public services and goods. And not only failing, but also the quality. I'm getting to the end. Looking at the press the last 1 month, 2 months, has been very depressing for me. The Besigye case alone could be that damning. But that's not even for me, that's not even the issue. There are two cases I want to point towards to show you what exactly is happening in our institutions. Look at the institution like police that should be holding and enforcing public order. There is a case, I'm not sure whether it is in Mbarara or another district, but a district in Western Uganda, where a woman of approximately 70 years plus was arrested in a very demeaning,
Actually, in Barra City. It
very
was in
manner.
the city.
70 years. If Professor Devesa alluded to the elements of good governance and how you measure how you are growing in governance, the issue of interinstitutional cooperation and respect. Now, you imagine the police, the coveted space of the police, and you have a police officer and a woman police officer dragging another woman in an African nation where respect for elders and all the connotations around it. A woman in a skirt being dragged. For me, that was really... Now, 2 days ago, I've seen another story. I don't know how true it is, but I'm told another old woman has been arrested somewhere in Mityana. This arrest was ordered by one lady RDC, and the allegation is that this woman has a daughter who is based in Dubai and is a TikToker and is being accused for insulting the government official. I don't know. As a lawyer, I fairly think I understand the Uganda's Penal Code Act. I'm curious to be at that court. I want to see this charge sheet, and I really want to see what happens in that court. I think as CCG we're going to take interest in this matter. Probably we need to apply to be friends to court in this matter. So these are depressing. These are really depressing because these are things that touch human beings, individual. This is an abrogation of rights of individuals. Now, this mother and her daughter, who are different persons in the eyes of the law, how do you drag me? Anyway, Parliament's role. I want to qualify this. By the way, interestingly, this Parliament is a mixed bag, it's 11th Parliament. When you look at the press again, as maybe a public depository for information, this Parliament has been lauded of a couple of things. One of them, for instance, is that in their very first, I think, session, they passed about 23 bills. Which is a record in the history of the Parliament. Of Parliament. And I think we need to laud them for that. And that's a good thing. Although the more serious question would be, what bills were these? Because we would like to see slightly much more strategic bills. And here, when I'm talking about strategic bills, for instance, I would like to see bills that find consonance between what aspirations of the public are, business, the civic space, democracy, all this, and what cabinet or government is thinking. For instance, we also at the same time had very disparaging reports. We had at one time, Kenya rejected our eggs, Kenya rejected our milk, Rwanda also, I think, posed some sanctions on some of. So the whole thing, the East Africa Community, the East Africa Community Treaty, and what is envisaged around it is that these countries should leverage on the opportunities that the collective market probably affords us. Unfortunately, 25 years, just the other day, they were celebrating 25 years since the rejuvenation of the EAC. But when you look at a scorecard where there is a dichotomy of challenges and successes, I think it is completely overweighed by challenges. One of the things they have done successfully is that we have passed a number of bills, ratified. We have the Customs Union Treaty, we have the protocol rather, we have the there's customs, we have the
common market,
we have the common market,
monetary union. Even without this alone, even without going to the political federation would be enough for us to sort of see that the ordinary East African, so to speak, has gained a higher status of life by having socioeconomic the socioeconomic aspects of their lives, rebooted, the attitudes and all this. But what is happening? Actually, we have much more non-tariff barriers than tariff barriers, impeding particularly, say, trade, movement of labor, and all these other things. So then, yes, and then the insecurity. So that does not, at the back of our mind, we're talking about 300 million
people. This should robustly turn around our lives. Because you see also, we cannot continue asking for greater democracy without development. It's very important. Now, what we seem to be having is that we've made some gains in democratic space, if you like to speak, in this region, but with instead dropping socioeconomic status or opportunities. With that kind of skewed relationship or nexus, we cannot sustain democracy. Because like these parliaments you're talking about, we are saying we have a skewed parliament which is not able, to hold government accountable, as Tim, who sits at the vantage point of watching parliament, is telling us. Why? Largely, I can assure you, it's because of poverty. You have MPs who have not come with any clear mission other than, to better their economic status. They have not come, they don't have any other credential worthy of mention other than to gain and cling on government titles and career. And this is seen in the lackluster manner. I mean, go to Kampala streets and see how authorities celebrated. Everybody is trying to put a serene on their car. Professor, I like the way he says it. What culture are you building? Even the border. I rode the border recently with a serene. So it tells you everybody has that there's that sense of déjà vu, of arrivalism. We are here because we are celebrating power, and false power by the way. So this whole attitude of this government, and that is the problem of revolutionaries. And I've also borrowed this from Professor Ndebesa. The revolutionaries have one challenge. When they get to these spaces, they begin to get comfortable and they begin to fall back to this thinking of arrivalism. Entitlement. So, as Ugandans, next year is still another year to deal with these guys who seem to have fallen from I don't know where. There's no pedigree.
Thank you, Doctor, for your perspective. Prof, we are witnessing a political scene that is punctuated with new alignments, new formations. The former leader of the opposition, Honorable Matthias Mpuuga, has inaugurated a new political formation, the Democratic Alliance. Recently, he has declared his intention to negotiate a fair, peaceful transition with the ruling government, the NRM. The opposition has also registered its displeasure and objection to such a move, but we want you to invoke your historical lens. What do you see going forward, coming into the new year 2025, even as we draw closer to the new political cycle? What should we expect on the political front?
As Amamba has put it, more of the same. I will repeat it here that Uganda is a nationalist state. The British came here and created a state called Uganda, but they did not do much to create a nation. So we are a nation, we are a state seeking to be a nation, but not doing it deliberately with an agenda. So when you look at the characteristics of the voting pattern in Uganda and the characteristics of the politics in Uganda, we are a divided society. And that is reflected in those coalitions that go nowhere. We are a deeply divided society. You can see our parliament is deeply divided. Forget about saying that it is the opposition also. Even within NRM, you see deeply divided group also, with the rebel NRM and the non-rebels and the whatever. And this year, actually, citizens had that participation in our public sphere, public space, by exhibiting. There was that parliamentary exhibition, which actually caught the parliament unawares. The exhibition which pointed out political corruption within parliament and now Parliament is on the defensive. They are jittery, it is on the defensive, and is likely even not deliberate and pass laws and acts which are pro-citizens. They are likely to pass those ones which are pro themselves, because they are on the defensive and they are fearful of the citizens. They will hardly pass laws and resolutions which are pro-citizens. In fact, our parliament, put it in a historical context, our parliament, especially the parliament since the 1995 constitution, has been involved in amending the constitution. And if you look at all amendments, they forgot that this parliament, and Article 1 says all power belongs to people, to citizens. But instead, the amendments that they have since made are taking away power from the citizens to the executive, not to the citizens. They have not followed power belongs to the people, and therefore Parliament passing laws and constitutional amendments to strengthen citizens. Now that even there was that citizens exhibition that exposed them, they are now going to be on the defensive, and they are going to be more anti-citizens. And they are likely to pass laws and resolutions and measures that are not pro-citizens. They are likely, as he has pointed out, they are likely to pass or make decisions that are going to give them more money to put in the campaigns. I think that is what I am seeing in the new year. But also I'm seeing this deeply divided society, which is reflected in Parliament. Also, Parliament getting involved in bickerings, fighting each other. Even the NRM people will fight each other. Then the NRM will fight the opposition. And then we are going to have elections. You have seen people already attacking my colleague Odoi Tang. They are heading for primaries next year. You are going to see how deeply divided this country is within the primaries. You are going to go to NUP, and you will see also within the same political party, members of parliament and the political class fighting amongst themselves. And that is going to vindicate me that Uganda is a nationalist state, a deeply divided society. Now, that one may have been imposed on Uganda or whatever the case may be. But Ugandans and our political class leaders have not reflected, sat back and reflect that what is needed is to create a nation state, to narrow the distance between the regions, the distance between the political players, the distance between the people, the citizens, and the state. You see, the state-society relations is also not good. If you want, let's use the question of trust, citizens' trust. How many citizens trust that when you go to a government hospital, you will receive services? How many citizens can trust that KCCA is doing the right thing? You remember Chitezi that happened this year. How many people trust police to do what it is supposed to do? How many people trust the judiciary to dispense justice? How many people trust the land commission to do the right thing to do, that it's supposed to do? Now, that lack of citizens' trust in state and state institutions is reflected in the divisiveness of the country. And our parliamentarians, as he has pointed out and the colleague has pointed out, they are not driven, they are not informed by a clear national agenda. We don't have a national agenda. We call it in our scholarship the national question. There is a national question in Uganda, but I don't know how many parliamentarians really understand the national question. The national question in Uganda has never been resolved because there is no nation state. There is no nation in Uganda. There are fragments of Uganda, but we have one state. But these ones are putting this side. That is why members of parliament could go to, is it Rwengo or whatever, and say it is okay, it has no problem stealing national coffers from the national coffers and bring the crumbs to your population. The other day, there was issues of Mabati, and the ministers were arrested. We saw citizens coming to protect, to defend those who stole the Mabati. And the Mabati question.
Even the president at one time said the beauty about the thieves in Uganda is that they are stealing, and we are fortunate they are not taking this money.
They are investing it here.
They are investing it here.
And that additionally, and that at least it is invested here, and it looks as if it is positive. And the citizens also kept quiet about it. That means the citizens do not look at the state as theirs. And whoever vandalizes the state, no problem. You can see this year, the way the state has been vandalized. Look at these electric what are they? These transmitters.
Yes.
From Karuma and whatever, they have been vandalized.
Pylons
have been vandalized. If you go to the Entebbe Express, there used to be this wire mesh. You remember when they had just, you go there is no wire mesh now. They have taken it, and don't think that citizens don't know that the wire mesh has gone. Even along the roads, people just remove these guardrails, and people don't mind. You know, people don't mind about this nation, the state, even the state property, they don't mind about it, and they don't mind about their MPs stealing. We need to put our house in order intentionally and deliberately, and we need to have an agenda for addressing the national question. Those who think there is no national question, then they are doing us a disservice. But all in all, in summary and for the new year, is that what we expect from the political class, especially our representatives, is that they are going to be too busy campaigning, and we are likely to have less sittings because we are likely to have no quorum, and that will affect Parliament, because they will be involved in the campaigns. We are likely to have more divisions because we are a deeply divided society. We are likely to have more quarrels and political fights at the expense of legislating for nation building, and also carrying out the other major function of having a parliament that puts our executive to order in its role of parliamentary oversight function. We are going to have less and less of this. But ultimately, I would like to leave this message to the citizens, generally the citizens, that I don't know whether the term, but this is not necessarily to support NUP or whatever, but that let us as citizens, let us hold all those holding political offices to account, whether they are members of parliament, whether they are councillors, whether they are district leaders, whether they are national leaders. They should all be accountable to the citizens. The problem we have in Uganda is that citizens do not look at the state as theirs. They do not look at political leaders as their servants. They are looking at it the other way around, that they are our masters and we are the servants, when actually the leaders should be our servants and we are the masters. So how can the masters go and kneel down to the servants? Let the citizens hold our leaders accountable in the new year. If we do that, then I think the country will move forward. But if we simply wait for them to give us the crumbs that fall from the table, and then we go back into the cycle of reverse, having masters becoming servants and having servants become masters, then we shall get it wrong, and we shall not build a nation, and we shall remain in a state without a nation.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your insights with us on the program. Dogo, your closing remarks and your end-of-year message to the citizenry.
Thank you so much. Really, mine in the conclusion is to really thank our viewers, thank the public for the resilience, thank them for the journey that we've had together in this year. It takes a bit of strength to persevere, but also to make the contribution to the governance, but also the framework that we are in as a country. As we conclude the year, from me really is to wish you and yours a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and to also mention that it's a period that's characterized by very interesting and also a number of things. Please keep safe on our roads, stay safe. Let's be good citizens by ensuring that we take care of what is right. Thank you so much and all the best.
Many thanks indeed, Timothy. Doctor, your closing remarks and your message to the citizenry as the year wraps up.
Yeah, for me, I'm in a very positive mood. I am in a mood to engage in the civic space, and I would like to encourage every citizen outside there to get up, claim their rights, and work towards this tendency of government becoming much more authoritarian. And you can do this in all your small spaces. For instance, one, I'd like to call institutions that are enablers of the rule of law. Like, for instance, the Uganda Law Reform Commission has a really broad mandate. One of them is the question of translation of laws into languages that are understood. They have a duty of outreach. They are issues which look small, but they are issues that profoundly affect the lives of our people, the ordinary citizen. For instance, something like police bond. A police bond is charge-free. If you are a DPC out there, really, what does it take to put a simple poster at the reception area of your police station and say, do not pay for police bond? Two, the lower level leaders. The part of the elites, I want to call upon the elites, the intelligentsia, civil society, to include as part of their broad agenda increasing literacy of our people in understanding constitutionalism and rule of law. Because the only weapon of the poor to advance in elements of socioeconomy and development is basically the right policies and a regulated environment they are living in. For instance, if a police officer has acted against the law, it's not that police officers are not reproachable. A police officer can be accused either directly or to the professional agencies, which is the police standards agency. Things as simple as a magistrate. If you are in a little village there and you feel a magistrate is working out of their bounds, just pick a pen, write a small letter, find the address, and the CAO, the chief magistrate, and all these, the police, the DPC, the RDC, should be able to have addresses of important institutions like the Judicial Service Commission. You can accuse, you can...
Or IGG.
Or IGG. You know, so there are small things citizens can do to defend this space. And I would like us to take more time in the coming year. The youth have completely disengaged from politics because they have lost interest. They think the politics, the elite politics of this country is not working for them. I would like to appeal to the youth to come back to the political fold, because we cannot have just 2/3 of our population electing leaders who are thinking and presiding for us as a country. Besides that, I wish everybody a Merry Christmas. As the year drags in, we wish our Muslim friends beautiful Eid towards the Eids, the times of Easter. And since it's an elective year, I think the only little asset we are left with is the question of peace and security. We should all work towards safeguarding that, because otherwise we are living within a very fragile ecosystem, and if this slips out of our hands, then we would have lost it all. Merry Christmas.
Maybe you should add on that you wish them a Merry Christmas and a Democratic New Year.
Thank you, Doctor, for your best wishes. Prof, your message to the citizenry and closing remarks.
Closing remarks is that let us own this country as citizens. Let's not be subjects. I have said this before, but people have not maybe got what exactly I mean. Citizens are those who, in addition to obeying the laws of the country, participate in implementing those laws and participate in shaping them, not sit back and wait to be dictated upon. Let us be citizens and not subjects. And the more we withdraw from the governance of this country, the more it goes astray. And when it goes astray, there may reach a time when we shall have fragility, when we shall have the things falling apart, and we shall all have to be blamed for having left the country to only a few individuals, that is the politicians. Democracy, good governance, and nation building are too important to be left to only the politicians seeking for positions in the power of responsibility, in positions of responsibility. Otherwise, once again, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a democratic 2025.
Thank you, Professor, for your wishes. Once again, let me appreciate you, gentlemen, Timothy Chimonges, Professor Ndebesa, and Dr. Tolit for your able participation on today's special edition of Focus on Parliament. Many thanks indeed to our esteemed viewers for your company and for your time. Many thanks to the production department for keeping us live on air. Our dear viewers, we remind you once again to engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can also watch this program. You have our best wishes for the new year and Merry Christmas. We'll see you next time.